And welcome to the Tuesday, October 16th Policy Committee meeting. Unfortunately, our student and teacher representatives were not able to make it this evening, but the committee is here. I know Mr. Madden's here, even though he's not physically here. He's in our midst somewhere. And we have Andrew and Susan.
He said he would be right here.
Okay. And of course, welcome again to Mr. Diazio, our solicitor, and Dr. Rabarczyk, our administrative liaison, and Mr. Batchelor, our superintendent. Dr. Rabarczyk, would you like to kick off the meeting with some administrative remarks?
Sure. We'll go right into just to cover the agenda. As we said, we have the material within the agenda itself to explain the policies, but we are looking at policy 006, and that's meetings and public participation. And that will be going for our second read this coming regular board business meeting. And then we have three policies that will be going for our first read. That's 004, 003, and 718. So we are going to be looking at those three policies this evening. As we made a commitment of moving from the district's policies and ARs and attachments to the Board Docs website, so we are in the process of determining a definitive timeline and based on the reconciliation of formatting errors that may occur during the upload. So sometimes when you're uploading based on the formatting pieces, there are going to be some reconciliations that we're going to have to make. So Patty is generously working on a timeline to determine how long that process is going to take based on the policies we have in old format compared to new.
Okay, but last I understood it, there was a question of whether we were outsourcing this to Board Docs to do for us, or if we were going to tackle this behemoth internally. Do you have any sense
Correct.
of
So we're
which way
doing a comparison of what's going to be more efficient for the district in itself. Particularly, I did not budget in policy this year for the upload of that much, so we're looking at what we can do of our own upload to the system itself. Patty's working on that and talking with Board Docs.
So as we're looking at it right now, one of the questions is, even though we could outsource it to Board Docs, there is a rather lengthy queue. So we're looking at all factors for how long would it take if we use Board Docs versus if we could do it in-house, how long would it take in-house, and compare the costs of both those different options.
Pardon me, just to clarify, there's a queue for the actual work.
Correct.
And in addition, you want to evaluate the cost.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's a queue to get there's a long waiting period to get it, and then it takes how many months once you are at the top, at the front of the line?
I believe it's 6 months. Could be longer, 6 to 9 months. Forget where it was.
You need a...
When you sent them a purchase order saying that you were going to use their service and pay for it, they would put you in the queue, and it would be 9 months till you got to the top of the queue, and they would look at your work. Then they had to evaluate how long they thought it would take them to be able to upload everything, depending on the formatting and whatever, which could take anywhere from 3 months to 6 months. And then to add all of the legal references, depending on how many there were, could take another 6 months. And then to do something else could take another 2 weeks, and then the last thing they had to do would only take 2 days.
And the piece of that is they're all individual fees for each of the process that you go through the queue.
So we should maybe talk about this, through finance or whatever, I guess, well, maybe not, but I just kind of remembered it being a package price. And so hearing a la carte doesn't ring to my memory of what I understood it was going to mean to move over to Board Docs and move the whole site over to Board Docs.
Well, for policies, they will upload all of your policies at no charge. But
Okay.
if you want them to do the formatting,
Thank you.
they're going to charge you per each thing that they format.
Thank you for clarifying, Patty. Okay, that's what I thought. All right.
And that's where we're looking at the reconciliation component to see what it would be for us.
Well, just from a practical, pragmatic standpoint, can you try to keep us apprised of which way that's going? Because I think there are real advantages to having our policies in the Board Docs at some manner, in some way, shape, or form, right? So,
Administratively, we're in agreement that we're going to move in this direction.
Okay.
It's just now which method, and we're looking at an internal solution that we believe would be more timely.
Okay.
So,
great. Well, thank you very much for that. And other administrative remarks?
Just two quick remarks. One of the policies, the handouts tonight was policy 007, distribution. We put that out there as an example of the importance of passage of policy 003, functions, that we're looking at. One of the policies we're looking at tonight. And if you look at policy 007, it has an inaccurate personnel title under subheading F. And with the passage of 003, we can then begin to update internally without a board review of the document and going through all the stages. So that would be for punctuation, capitalization, change of a reference, those minor things that we wouldn't have to worry about.
Yeah, I don't think 007 was given to us.
Oh. There it is.
Okay.
Molly, I know Molly copied it for us, so.
Thank you very much.
What?
007 is coming around as sort of a show and tell
Example.
about why it's important to look at policy 003 functions, because you had asked me that question, remember? So this is a sort of show and tell.
And then
about-
as that's coming around, just one last comment in regards to, since our September meeting, we have gone ahead and completed and posted the following documents to the website. That's policy 217, graduation requirements, and its administrative regulations, 628, federal fiscal compliance, and its accompanying administrative regulations, policy 138, English language development program, along with its accompanying AR and attachments, 231, student social events, policy 272, student wellness, and its accompanying AR, and policy 915, booster clubs, and its accompanying AR and attachments.
And thank you to everybody involved in making sure that so soon on the heels of passing these policies and writing the accompanying administrative regulations, that they're posted to the website so that they can be easily accessible to everyone upon adoption. The only other question, and I don't know if you're prepared to answer it, Dr. Rybarczyk, but the communications aspect of 915, did you have any administrative remarks you wanted to make about that?
Just that Mr. Bechtold and Michael Petiti and myself met today, and tomorrow we're going to actually be holding a phone conference to finish up the communication plan of how that's going to be delivered and administered to all administrators and community members.
Okay, just as a refresher to the rest of the committee, one of the final phases of the development of Policy 915 and its administrative regulation is a communication plan, so that all the aspects of that are disseminated clearly and consistently across the stakeholders, so that they understand the policy and administrative regulations, and they're prepared to abide by them when that
Correct. I know
goes
Mr.
into
Petiti
effect.
has a draft of the communication plan put in place already, but Mr. Bechtold wanted to review it one more time also, and then we're going to discuss it tomorrow.
Okay, great. So maybe next month you can give us an update on that?
Sure.
Okay, thanks so much. All right, so any other administrative remarks, or we're good to move into the public comment? All good, Tony?
All good.
Okay,
Thank you. I'm sorry.
so is there any public comment this evening? Good evening, Mrs. Sherry.
Some of the written responses to questions that were brought up about different issues don't appear to answer the question. So I had asked earlier in a previous meeting, communication, if the board actually has an opportunity to review the answers to the questions to make sure that they are correct. Several of them have to do with the Booster Club, and that's especially the 915AR. So I'm going to ask them again, because several answers will say the Booster Club policy will address this question, the Booster Club policy will address this question. For instance, what is the limit a Booster Club can charge as a fee? says the Booster Club policy will address this question. I just couldn't find that answer. If a Booster Club fee is not paid, are there consequences for the student? These are questions 11 and 13 from August. It says the Booster Club's policy will address this question. So I reread the AR and the policy, and I didn't find what that meant. There was a comment about students who couldn't afford to pay the fee, but what if the student just doesn't want to participate and pay any fee? What are the consequences? Can the student still participate in the sport, for example? I guess I still have questions about that. How is the fee determined? Will the Booster Club budget be established prior to determining a fee? And is this budget coordinated with the administration? Because at least in one part of either the policy or the AR, it talks about the importance of not duplicating purchases that the district is making. And I'm just wondering, well, wouldn't it make sense to coordinate with the district before establishing a budget to determine what items are really needed by the club or the sport? So, and finally, at the last meeting, according to the minutes, I brought up a comment about the exclusion of liability, and two small mistakes there. Indemnify is misspelled, additional is misspelled. But I wondered, that just sort of fell off the cliff, I guess. But I don't know how the district felt about that. Was that worth consideration, or was that not appropriate? I'd like to have some kind of feedback on that comment. And then public participation policy on page 9 states, if the presiding officer determines there is not sufficient time at a board meeting for additional public comments that are not directly related to a remaining action that is before the board or committee, the comment period may be deferred to the next board meeting. Looked up deferred, postponed, delayed, put off. So my question is, how will this additional time for public comment be added to the next meeting if you eliminate it at the end of a meeting? And my questions regarding the functions policy 003. Page 2 says, the board directs that all board policies be reviewed periodically to determine if they should be amended, suspended, revised, or repealed. The schedule for this review will be determined by the policy committee and the superintendent. The questions I have are, when will this schedule be posted, and how will the review be organized? And page 3 talks about an ethics law. The superintendent or designee shall implement a procedure to inform board members and designated employees of their responsibility under the ethics law. Is that a state ethics law? What specific law is that referring to?
Which policy was that? Just
Functions 003.
003. Okay.
And that's
Okay.
all I can come up with right now. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Is there any other public comment? Good evening, Mrs. Spurtle.
Good evening. Cindy Spurtle Wayne. Just a quick comment, because some of you were present in the prior meeting, and I forgot to mention it, but talking about spelling errors, there are some drastic spelling errors on some of the slides that were presented to us for the technology study. So before those are posted anywhere, you might want to go through. And also on the, so I understand when a policy is not posted, because in the August question and answers that were posted, a lot of the answers were see your answer in policy, again, booster policy 915. Last month, when last week, prior to last week's committee meetings, I went to look up 915 so I wouldn't have to go back into my papers and pull up a copy of the booster policy. It was not online. Now, is that because it wasn't finally agree, it's up there this week, and I went back 3 times to check to make sure that I wasn't missing, went from 9:14 to 9:16. So until the final approval, is it not posted, or is it, because it was a new policy, I believe, it hasn't been revised. So was that the reason? Since we've been talking a lot about the Booster Club. And I have a question, policy 006 is back on the agenda again because there were a few more changes made at the last committee meeting other than section 10, which was mentioned on the agenda. Going back and reading it again, in section 5, the agenda is presented, it is agreed, or part of the policy is the agenda will be presented to the board 3 days, at least a minimum of 3 days prior to the meeting. Could the public be included in that sentence? 3 days to the, as long as it's prepared and ready, could it be posted online as well as presented to just the board? But then if you go further into section 15 on the 006 public participation, it states that the agenda and pertinent docs need not be available, will be made available to the public, a hard copy, at the meeting. So if you were to add public into section 5, that would negate that sentence in section 15, and the public would be pleased if that were the case. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to quickly respond to a couple things because I think they're simple. One is that policies and administrative policies, for sure, as the work is being done on them, are always on the website, and they are changed after they've been adopted. So as the work is being done, there's always some version, the most current version of the policy on the district website. Once the revised policy is officially adopted by the board, that new version, within a very short period of time, is posted to the website and replaces the more recent version that we had been working on. And I also think, just because it's come up a couple of times, there's a real difference legally, I believe, between the words may and shall. And maybe we can have our solicitor speak to briefly as we go through the meeting, or maybe in new business, the difference between a may and a shall, because those are very intentional words and they have different legal meanings. So I don't know if we want to address this now or later, or hopefully we'll, do you think that that's something quick, or should we do it towards new business? Yeah. You want to do it?
Sure. Is it regarding a specific
No, just in general, because I've heard that question come up, and I just know that there, in my unofficial legal capacity, just being exposed to it, may and shall are intentional words.
Sure.
So maybe that would be clarifying for a lot of people.
Sure. So shall is a required provision.
Want to move the mic a little bit closer. We noticed upstairs you got to pull it a little closer.
That better?
Yes.
So
You
shall
move the mic.
shall
You
is
may
a
move the
required
mic. Yes.
provision. May is an optional provision. So you must do something or you're permitted to do something. That's the difference. Mandatory versus non-mandatory.
Right, right. And those are intentional decisions when you're writing policy to decide whether you are mandating that something occur or it is permissible for something to occur. And in which case that would be may. Hopefully that's helpful. Okay. That said, let's move into the approval of minutes. Does anybody have any questions besides, I know the spelling errors came up in the minutes that perhaps we can correct before posting, if that's not a problem. Does anybody else on the committee have any question with the minutes? No? Okay. Well then, with those 2 spelling corrections, let's consider those minutes approved. And we will move into our first agenda item, which is Policy 006, Meetings and Public Participation. And you want to just quickly, Tony, tell us, it's coming back again for repeat first read because, or we're on to our second read. We're on to our second read with it, yes.
So originally the policy was brought in September for a repeat first read due to the content revisions we made in section 10. At this point, since that's been corrected and we've made that adjustment, we are recommending that be brought to the full board at the October regular business meeting, first, second read, and adoption.
Okay. From the committee, there Are there comments from committee members? Nothing new has occurred since the repeat first read. Do you have any other comments on here that are non-substantive that would help not get in the way of this going for a second read at the end of the month? Or if you do have substantive changes, we might have to send it for a repeat first read. So would anybody like to give some feedback on this policy?
Well, to the chagrin of the public, with regard to Section 5, I don't want to revisit changing the requirement to put the agenda online for the public at least 3 days before the meeting. This is actually, Section 5 is very specific. It's just about the regular business meeting. And as with many things that we talked about, all the things that we put on the website, this is one of those situations where I think the district is very proactive and tries very hard to put many, many, many things out on the website, in advance of the meeting. But the difference in being legally required to give it to the board because we have to conduct the business. And I want you to notice this requirement's actually only for the regular business meeting. It's not even for the committee meetings. So even the board is not legally required to have the committee agendas or special meeting agendas 3 days in advance. So this is a very specific thing about the board business meetings, and we set those dates out for the entire year, and I believe it's also a legal requirement that the board members have to be made aware in written form of the dates of our regular business meetings. And that's all very specific statute. It has to do with our responsibilities to be at those regular business meetings. So the district then goes above and beyond that, and I think to the feedback of the public and the request of board members and lots of conversation about communication, we've made a lot of efforts to get as much out on the district website in advance. I don't know if I don't know for a fact if Board Docs is open on Friday or Monday morning. Yeah, Friday afternoon for the public. So in fact, for the most part, we do have that information out there when it's for the public at the same time as the board members. But I would not be comfortable changing that requirement to a shall for the public. I think it would present some real challenges for the administration in particular circumstances. We had a circumstance a few months ago. We didn't have electricity on the Friday before a meeting. Right. And that was okay because board members were hand-delivered board packets, and so we had our written paperwork, but the website wasn't working that day. So if we had had a shall in there, it would have presented a legal challenge. And that's why I'm comfortable with keeping it as a may, and I know that the district works really hard to be proactive about that. That's my feeling on it.
Okay, thank you. Andrew or Chuck, do you have any feedback on that?
Not on that particular issue, no.
Okay. Administration, do you have any feedback on that?
No,
issue?
can I just note on the second page, I just want to make sure that was clarified. The second change was where the Roberts Rules of Orders newly revised, the latest edition, we added that so we wouldn't have to go back every time Robert Rules changes their edition. So it was clarified with latest edition.
Right, right. Okay, well, yes, I think I'm confident that the district makes every effort. It's been pretty standard practice, short of an emergency, to make these materials available to all of us, including the public, as soon as humanly possible. And some things get in the way, and a legal requirement is very, very binding. I think that we have to have faith in our practice, and if our practice fails us, that's another story, but I think we have pretty solid practice, and if at such time there isn't, then we revisit that. But, I think having faith is a good thing sometimes. So at that point, if nobody has any other feedback on 006, then this committee recommends that it go forward.
I do have something I'd like to say.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh, you just didn't have anything to say about
that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's all right.
Mr. Babson, bring it on.
It's okay.
Dr. Babson.
Dr. Babson, I'm so sorry.
It's okay. So I think it's mentioned in the footnotes that Title 65, the Sunshine Act, is our guiding light, so to speak, pardon the pun. For pages 8 through 11 talk about public participation in meetings. And it might be a good idea to put that language somewhere in the document, that the Sunshine Act is guiding our words of this, of the policy. That it says 65, Title 65 in the references, but it might be good to perhaps put the wording so that those reading this can just have that, again, pardon another pun I can't resist, a light bulb go off perhaps, while they're reading this, that the Sunshine Act is...
A ray of light.
Exactly, yes. Is guiding what we're doing here. And again, it's the reference is made there, Title 65, sections 701, et cetera. So that's just a minor request, but it
Something
could
like in accordance with the Sunshine Act
Correct.
or something like that?
Correct. Or even something more specific like sections, 14 through 19 concern issues of public participation in meetings, in open meetings, and that the Sunshine Act guides our policy here. Something to that effect. I think it could be helpful for the public to know that, there's plenty of leeway within, as much as is within our purview locally. But I think it can be helpful to know that, we're not just sort of grabbing these ideas out of thin air, that they're closely guided by the Sunshine Act. Could be helpful.
Interesting feedback. Anybody
I-
else want to
I-
comment on
I
that?
would agree with that. I don't have an issue. When we go to board docs, doesn't that come up? Didn't we say I'm sorry. Didn't we say that we're going to expand on these references a little bit anyway?
So within
You got a mic, Tony.
Within the content itself, there will be sub-footers within that. If you click on it and go over that number, it would automatically take you to the Sunshine Act.
Okay.
That's one of the things one of the highlights of
Okay,
board docs that will
gotcha.
be in there.
But you want to specifically mention that that's the act, what the act is.
I think it could
That
be
doesn't
helpful.
come up.
Because Title
You're not
65
mic'd,
to the...
Andrew.
Sure. To the layperson or to someone who isn't looking at these documents on a regular basis, it might not click.
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. Since it is about open
Susan,
meetings.
did you want to say something about that?
My only hesitation about it is that it just means bringing it back to a first and second read. Again, I believe. Ed, I believe it would.
discussing
Yeah,
that,
I
so.
believe it would.
If it would require that,
I think
again,
I
I
would
don't want
be.
to double down on the chagrin to which you referred earlier, but
Well, I mean,
Would
let me
that be a
say,
change? You're just explaining what it is.
See, this is why policy 003's got to go through, gentlemen.
No,
that's true.
I'm being
no,
very serious.
Amy's quite right. So that's my only hesitation, is that it just requires bringing it back through. And
Why would you have to bring it back through if you just explain
it's-
what the reference is? An explanation of what the reference is. The
I mean, I'll
reference is
defer to
the
our,
reference is
I'll
already
defer to
there.
our solicitor on that one.
Reference is already
I
there.
think it would depend what language you ultimately settle on. I think if you just put a
Correct.
reference in here that in accordance, this policy is
Governed by
written
the
in
Sun-
accordance with the Sunshine Act, I don't know that, I would probably say that's probably arguably not substantive. But depending on if you're getting into quoting actual language from the statute and
Right.
putting more language into the policy, I would say
Right.
that probably is substantive.
I would
highlighting
weigh
specific sections.
against that idea. Again, I think it's just really, the Sunshine Act is a moniker that is sort of like an aide-memoire to the lay person that, okay, yeah, this is Title 65 Sunshine Law.
Well,
So you could just put it in the reference. You could just put in parentheses, quote, Sunshine Act.
If you look at the first sentence of the policy itself,
That's where I was going to suggest it, Ed.
instead of saying in conformity with applicable law, you could put in accordance with the Pennsylvania Sunshine Act.
Correct.
If that helps, I don't know whether that completely addresses
Is that the
concern
only
that you're
law?
raising, but
No.
we could put that in.
You could say with applicable law, comma, including the Sunshine Act, because it is not the only act that governs this
Correct.
particular
Right.
policy.
Right.
Is that a substantive change?
I would say that's not.
Okay.
Bingo.
That,
All right.
that sounds good to me, and this is pursuant to a meeting that we had recently.
Right.
And so that's what, made me think of this.
I like it. How about the rest of the group?
I'm fine. So I'm fine with that if it doesn't, if Ed feels it's not substantive to the, and wouldn't prevent us from kind of putting this one back on the shelf.
Okay.
Because there's other ones to be done.
Yes.
So it
Thank
would
you.
be something
Yep.
like in conformity with the Sunshine Act and other applicable law?
What I heard Susan say was in conformity with applicable law, comma, including,
The Sunshine Act.
but not limited
not
to
limited
the
to.
Pennsylvania Sunshine Act.
Okay, perfect.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Okay.
Very good.
Perfect.
All righty then. So are we ready? 006 then with that non-substantive change can keep right on rolling to the October business meeting. Correct? Everybody good with that?
I'm good with that,
Okay,
yeah.
super. All right, then let's move on to the next agenda item, which is policy 004, orientation program for new board members. Do you want to revisit, Dr. Robarczyk, why
Right,
we're
this
looking
is-
at that policy?
This is just being revised and reflect to the updated school code that happened in June of 2018 that requires school board members, and that means new school board members, to participate in orientation, training, and programs. So we don't have to go backwards in any way. It's just for those that will be elected from this point forward that would be participating in the orientation.
And committee, any questions, comments? You've got your finger on the button, so go ahead.
I'm waiting. I'm proud of this. I've been proud of this particular policy because it was something that we proactively brought forward. And I feel like we were ahead of the curve in terms of the law, saying, yes, in fact, you should probably do some training with your new board members, introduce them to your district, talk to them a little bit about what it actually means to be a board member. So kudos to Amy, because I know she was a champion of this. But, for me, this law is just, for me, validation that what we had in place here for many, actually preceding Ken, but for a number of years, that having a formal opportunity to orient new board members was a good thing for governance. So, I don't know what it specifically is, Ed, that had you have to add K, organizational structure. Was there something specific in the statute about that?
No, I think it was just something that we thought would be helpful when we were reading through this.
Okay.
I'm not
Because
exactly
we-
sure where
it
the
was-
idea.
well,
Enhancing our training already.
Right, because there were changes over the past few years in regards to that organizational structure.
Right.
We thought it'd be important to incorporate it into that board training, so there's a clear understanding.
So then my only question to you is that, given that boards now kind of have to do some kind of training, does the guideline, that we were very intentional in our wording about saying all board members should endeavor to participate in this session.
In all sessions.
In all sessions. I guess my question to you is, given the law, that the training requirements that have been put forth, if you don't participate in our information session, do we need to put something in here that you do have to, you nonetheless have to participate in some training?
I think if you look at the first sentence of the policy,
The
which
purpose.
says, correct, in addition to complying with the minimum training requirements upon election, re-election, or appointment to the board as outlined in applicable law. So you have to do those things.
I see what you're saying, Ed, but I
would have
think-
called that a
yeah.
guideline. I guess, I don't think that the purpose of the orientation is to comply with the minimum, I would have put that as a guideline, that this orientation is in addition, is a guideline, is in addition to complying with minimum training requirements upon election. I don't know what the thinking was here, and I'm not married to it one way or the other, but guidelines for me, or I would have said that the purpose is something more along the lines of, we already had a purpose. We already had an intention to provide our district board members with orientation, and now, in addition, the state has created a requirement. maybe it doesn't matter much, but is what we are putting forth as our information session, does it fulfill the legal requirement of what a board member needs to do with regard to the law? I guess that's really my question.
There are ways that school districts can try to develop their own program and have that approved by the state, but until it's approved, just having your own session would not count.
So then this gets to the point of what my guideline, why I'm asking this question, Ed, because this could leave people with the, that's why, that the guideline needs to be that our orientation program is in fact in addition to the minimum training requirements that are required.
Isn't that what the first sentence says?
But that's talking about the purpose. Well, here, let me say it differently, then maybe I'm not asking it well. This is an orientation program that we are choosing to do. We were choosing to do it before the law changed. Did there need to be wording in a policy somewhere stating as a guideline, not as a purpose, but as a guideline, that a board member has to participate in minimum training requirements upon election?
Prior to the most recent change in law, there was not.
Correct. So now that the law has changed.
Oops, I'm so sorry.
So
The question,
what
let me try to help, see if I
Yeah,
can help.
I mean, I think you
So-
might know where I'm going here.
I'm sorry.
Because
I'm
of the,
trying to find something.
Just close it.
that's right. With
No,
the
but I wanted to
change
find
in the law and
something.
the additional requirements now. So the additional requirements go into effect with this upcoming election. Those board members who are elected to office beginning this November are going to have required trainings that they have to participate in. Does that requirement of the new trainings that they have to be, in passing that, did it dictate that every school district had to create a policy that say they must do it?
No.
Or is it just correct, okay, so it's just, it is a law that you have to participate.
Correct.
We did not have to create a policy. We are just
you.
now, so that
That
was
was
your-
my question.
right.
Thank you.
So we are now just clarifying, because we were ahead of the curve, to go back to that language, we're just clarifying that our orientation program, and I would say what I have read about the law, our orientation program will be something different and will not take the place. I assume over time, things will change and it may be easier for districts to apply. But as of right now, it's very prescribed. What is that required by law training? And then this is our orientation program would be in addition a separate training.
So that could be clarified.
So then, no.
I think it is clear. I mean.
But it gets back to, then we don't need to be making a change to this policy.
We really don't.
If
In
this
essence.
policy, if the change in law did not require a change in policy, thank you, Ken, you clarified my question well, then we didn't actually have to change this policy. Because if we actually had to
Correct.
change this
That's
policy,
probably
we would have had
correct,
to
yes.
change the guidelines, because the policy says, the purpose says why you're doing it, the guidelines say what you're doing, which is why I was asking, how come this isn't in the guidelines? But you answered the question, you asked my question better than I. Now, I don't have a problem with it, and it's here, it's fine. I think it kind of states the obvious, which if nothing else makes it clear that our internal training at this point does not supplant the minimum training requirements.
The most important change here is probably the addition of the legal reference, which is Section 328 of the school code, which outlines the requirement for school board members to now have training.
Except that it didn't have to be in policy.
It doesn't have to be, correct.
Okay, all right.
Correct.
All right.
Did you have
Sorry.
something, Chuck, you wanted to say?
No.
Well, not to throw a curveball at anybody, but as long as we're talking about purpose, I wanted to see if you wanted to try this one on for size, and that is that, you know how I always like purposes to sort of explain why we're doing something from maybe a more holistic standpoint? You know, something like the Iowa Lighthouse study says that the better prepared a board is. That's one of the principles in this study that they did that showed what's the difference between highly effective and less effective boards. And board training is one of the things that separates a highly functioning board from a not so highly functioning board. So would it make any sense, since this is already in the review cycle here, to create a purpose that states why board orientation is so important? And to cite something like the Iowa Lighthouse study or even PSBA's own governing principles, which are in our policy 11 in terms of ongoing professional development for board members, so that something that says why we have this board training. Because our purpose right now doesn't really say that. And usually the purpose sort of gives you the high level of why we have such a policy in the first place. So would anybody be opposed to a revamp of the purpose in that regard?
I don't want to mention the Iowa study,
Okay.
mostly because I have no idea what it is, and I don't want people to, I think we can just plainly say why we believe in this without necessarily mentioning a study.
Because that's sort of like when you look at the evaluation of high-functioning versus not-so-high-functioning boards, the Iowa Lighthouse study is often the thing that's cited, so you wouldn't even have to mention it. You could maybe even cite it, or you don't have to go there at all. But for studies that have been done on school boards, the Iowa Lighthouse study is usually sort of has become kind of the gold standard of directive for what makes for a good board versus a not-so-good board. You don't like that. I can tell by the look in your eyes.
It's not that I don't like it, it's that I don't want, I don't think we should cite it.
Since
Okay.
this is only going for.
I don't think we should cite it by name, pardon me.
Okay.
I'm okay with the purpose, I don't want to cite it by name.
Since this is only going for a first read, are we okay to take this back, rework that purpose? Mm-hmm. And we can add that piece under the guidelines at the top there, what you were referring to, which should be a guideline, actually. And then we can come back next month with the restructured policy.
And would it be presented as a first read?
It would be presented as a first read then, yes.
Okay.
So I just have a quick question. So there's a distinction between an orientation and training.
Correct.
So ongoing training versus orientation, right? So where I'm just thinking about, which document should refer to which, just sort of keeping a fairly clean separation of function of policy, one dealing with orientation, another dealing with ongoing training.
I think what we can do is let's have Tony and the team go back and look at, adjusting the purpose language here, identifying the purpose language that there is required training, and in addition to required training, that the district believes the importance of orientation for good governance and something plain language about that to explain that this is our requirement for not requirement, our guidance. Because again, when we created this, and I think I was here for this creation, we talked a lot about the idea that, should endeavor to participate in all sessions. I mean, that was something that we discussed in being respectful of all members. So I think we could come back next month with a reworded purpose.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that.
I just have a question.
That even can be reflected in the title too. I mean, since we're going back anyways and revamping that purpose, I mean, it's easily something that could be.
And if I could, I'm sorry, Chuck.
Okay.
But Ed, you were saying that section 328, that comprises the new laws requiring board training? Is that correct? Okay.
Correct. So given that this is going to look substantially different, I would recommend not moving this forward to a first reading.
Correct.
We'll bring it back
Right.
to the next month's policy committee.
Yep.
Thank you.
Chuck, did you have something to say?
Yes, now, when we look at the reason or the rationale why the school code changed, do they come up with that, Ed? Can you see that when they're changing something in the state code? Is there rationale for it someplace?
Usually there is, usually with a piece of state law legislation, when a member of the House or a member of the Senate introduces the legislation, they'll circulate a memo
Right.
explaining
I was just
the
gonna say that.
background.
Right.
So we can go back to the memo and look at,
Exactly, that would be
The
helpful
history.
to realize why they did that, and maybe that could be some of the reasoning why we're continuing the orientation, which would be above and beyond what they're requiring.
Right, that's a good idea. Yeah, the memo is the key. The memo always shows the intention of the legislator. How authentic it is may be up for debate sometimes, but they always state their intentionality
It'd be nice
behind
to see what
the
somebody else is
legislation. So maybe the memo could just be circulated to the committee or something like that. It's not hard to find. Okay, super. So that will go, 004 will come back again in November for another first read, a repeat first read. It's a theme. Okay. Next agenda item, policy 718, service animals in schools.
So
Ed and
this,
Tony, you're on.
this was a policy that was adopted originally in 2016 and was called for an administrative regulation, and it did not come about because there was so much content within the policy itself. So in reviewing the policy, we realized the AR content was within there, and therefore we broke it into the two documents. And under this revised policy, a definition of service animals was also aligned with federal law and clarification of the new narrow circumstances, that a miniature horse may also qualify now as a service animal. So we're recommending this be brought to the full board at the October regular business meeting for a first read.
Committee members, questions? Andrew, I know you had a lot of time to read this policy when you're stuck on the train today between Overbrook and where?
No man's land.
No man's land.
There's a little train complication today for poor Andrew.
Yeah,
Any questions, though?
the
Since-
vagaries of SEPTA. I suggest that we gallop ahead. Sorry, I couldn't.
That's very funny.
Mr. Madden?
So are we changing from a dog to service? That's what we're doing?
Both a dog and a miniature horse can be considered a service animal.
But so we're not saying a miniature horse, we're just saying,
It is included. It has to be included because that is identified under federal guidelines.
This was language this policy was recently
I didn't get a chance to
redone.
read this one. There's a miniature horse in here?
Yes, the
Can't be
policy,
a squirrel.
No, it cannot. It cannot be any other animal.
we recently redid this policy, and for whatever reason, I don't think anything changed in ADA, but we did not make a specific carve-out for a miniature horse, and upon review of the policy, don't laugh, it's good of me. Upon review of the policy, we realized, I think Ed realized, that miniature horse had a specific caveat in the policy according to the ADA and the American with Disabilities Act, and we had not included that, so that is now in there.
Correct. And generally, all the information in the AR was taken from the policy.
Right, so basically, it's been broken into two pieces, and some additional language straight from ADA that was not included before is in the policy. Anything else?
I do have a few
Yeah.
questions, but I'll
Sure.
let Chuck.
So just out of curiosity, so the miniature horse has to be housebroken?
Correct.
Somebody was
gonna
going to
bring
bring that up.
You did.
I asked that too. I just wanted to know how you
And yes, there
housebreak
are
a
provisions for
horse.
how you housebreak a miniature horse.
Would you like to share them with us?
I'll pass this time.
So what happens with other type of service animals besides a dog and a miniature horse?
Under the ADA, that's all that qualifies this time.
So are we
And I
limited,
think-
are we limited to that definition?
Yes.
Under law,
We have to have those too. But that doesn't mean that we're limited. Like for instance, there are people that bring a cat into a classroom for a child that has autism, we'll say. And that purring and that presence of that service animal allows that child to be educated in an inclusive setting. So I'm all for service animals, okay? But I think just limiting it to either a dog or a miniature horse.
Chuck, there is language in regards to when you look at the ADA and you dig deep with it, a service animal versus a comfort animal. They are given different definitions. And such as a cat is a
Okay.
comfort animal because they're not identifying an epileptic attack. They're not identifying certain issues.
Wouldn't that
dealing-
be considered a service? Because without that animal, the child could not receive an education.
But just under ADA is really the guidance we're going under that considers the difference between a comfort and a service.
But we could decide to allow a comfort. If a case came before us,
Sure.
I mean, it's done out there, I'm
Absolutely.
just
I mean, I
saying.
would imagine, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just saying that it's done, and
So-
there's a fine line between what a service is.
And, right.
You don't have to have an animal that is showing you how to go out the door. If it's going to increase your ability to learn, maybe that's.
Chuck, this paragraph here in the AR might be helpful to you because it explains how law makes the distinction between psychiatric service animals and emotional support animals, and where the training of that animal to help under those circumstances meets the criteria set forth in the law versus where it doesn't. So it's,
I think you could have a cat that's a service animal, but that's just my opinion.
you could, but it has to meet this criteria in the law for it to be deemed a
They
service
do
animal.
have pedigreed cats too, not just
So-
dogs.
Can we go back like a couple of steps here?
No,
So
I'm good with whatever we have here. I'm just saying that if the opportunity comes and we do need to look at it because of an individual child, we have the ability to do that, correct? Okay, I'm fine.
I think, my recollection is that when we did this policy a year and a half ago, year and a half? 2.5.
2.5 years ago.
We had a long conversation about, at this point, keeping the distinction at a service animal versus an emotional support animal in the district. Because really, the reality is, anytime that we bring an animal into the district for the benefit of one student, it could potentially, present problems or challenges for another student. That was kind of and so it's a circumstance where the balance is being struck. And at least at the time, the balance landed on service animals, which have a very specific legal definition. My question for you is that I thought that we discussed that very specific legal definition when we did this policy 2 years ago. So I am surprised to see that the definition of a service animal has been limited back to a dog from any other animal, with the exception of a miniature horse. This seems like so that was kind of a question. Did something else change? Because that was a conversation with regard to the function that a service animal provides. And it's very specific guidelines, and it makes the very specific distinction between that and an emotional support animal. And that's where I thought we landed 2 years ago. So I am trying to understand what has further changed out here, that we are restricting it back to dog, to Chuck's point. I completely understood the limitations or the restrictions of the function it performed had to be in the service animal functionality, not the emotional support, therapy, well-being, psychiatric, work. I didn't think at the time that meant it had to be restricted to a dog, or now I guess a miniature horse. That's one question. And we did have that very long conversation 2 years ago. Just kind of specifically in a couple of places, now that we've defined service animal, are we calling it a service animal, capital S, capital A? Because our typical practice has been in a policy, once we define something, we capitalize it, and there's a couple of places, not many. I think that's my biggest, those are my two really my big question is, what else changed that had us moved back to just specific dog?
So under
Can you move the
under
mic?
federal law currently, the current interpretation is that only dogs qualify, with the caveat that under the ADA, there is this minor carve-out for miniature horses. The regulations themselves have not changed, I believe, since 2010, but the interpretation has changed. I think you're correct that back in 2015, 2016, the interpretation may very well have been that it could be any animal. I don't know right off when exactly that change was or what triggered it, but the current interpretation under federal law is that it's limited to dogs, with the exception of the miniature horse.
Okay.
Chuck, to your point, I think if you have a student that's in a scenario where they may need an accommodation in order to come to school, that accommodation on a student-specific basis can be handled through an IEP. And certainly,
Yes.
an IEP is governed by separate federal law, And if federal law dictates that we do something, that would override any policy that we would have. So I think you can be confident that we will meet our obligations to students with disabilities through the IEP process, and that this policy is just a more broad statement of policy with respect to other service animals on
I'm good
campus.
with that.
Yeah, and Chuck, you weren't on policy 2 years ago, but to your point, that was the very long conversation we had. And there was a lot of conversation about that would be handled through an IEP. This was a specific,
Because we specifically brought Kevin Kane in at that time to bring clarity.
correct. Yes, okay. So, other than, just my comment about using the definition where appropriate, I thank you for clarifying my question about it.
Right, in the definition, service is capitalized and animal is lowercase, but everywhere else, both are uppercase, so.
We just need consistency.
Right, exactly, so whichever way you think is appropriate, as long as it's
We'll go
consistent.
through like we have with, once it's defined, we'll keep it capitalized.
Well, in the definition.
Definition.
It's, okay, so you're going to put a capital A in the definition?
Yes.
Okay. All right, super. So this one is ready to go for a
First read.
in October. All right, great. All right, then the last item on our agenda is Policy 3, Functions.
So 003 functions is, we recommended some revisions to memorialize RTSD policy review practices and provide maximum consistency and efficiency in policy work. As I use the example with 007, it's something that we could change without having to go through the full docket of review, of board review, so minor changes.
Right, and just for a little bit more context for the committee, in 003, you'll notice that one of the citations, one of the references is policy 007. So when I looked at 7, I thought to myself, F, assistant, one of the people who will be given a copy of the policy manual is the assistant to the superintendent for financial and management services. We do not have such a person, so as long as we're doing this, figured, that maybe should be updated, and if we pass policy 003, we don't have to do this update of 007, changing the title, through a two-step process, policy process. It can just simply be done by the administration and reposted with the correct title. So that's why we're doing that, and also, policy 003 just helps sort of flesh out a little bit better how we do policy work, how we've been doing policy work in this district, and it memorializes it in the event that there is turnover of board members, administrators, lawyers, whatever. So we would appreciate being able to move this through for a first read at the business meeting in October. Anybody have any concerns, comments, questions about it?
The only question I have is, so even the administrative changes that might be made with policy 003 would be brought to the attention of the policy committee. So for instance, with the authority of policy 003, you might have an agenda item in a future agenda where there might be 2 or 3 policies that are provided to us in red line, red line showing us what administratively what will be changed on them, but they will be provided to the policy committee, and then I would assume through board docs to the entire board, so that everyone is aware that there are changes that were made.
Correct, because they
Non-substantive, but changes nonetheless.
non-substantive, because they would still have to get a copy for their updated policy manual as well.
Correct, but that's usually not redlined, and so, people get them and they might wonder, well, what was changed? So, at least for, at the very least, red line on board docs is important so that people can see what the change was.
Sure.
I mean, when I see a policy, that's the first thing I look through and say, okay, well, what did you change?
Okay.
Just to clarify one point there, the proposed language in 003 states that the policy committee chair or designee will publicly notify the board of any
Right.
non-substantive changes. So usually the way that plays out is, Susan, there's not necessarily red line documents going back and forth, but that at the board meeting, in whoever the chair's report is, they will notify the board that, as an FYI, a title was updated in policy 007. There's not necessarily documents that go back and forth, because usually the changes are so minor that somebody's just making the change. It might be changing a number or changing a title.
is the scope of this policy, the way you're proposing it, is this a common policy throughout the town, the state?
I would say that it's a common practice, at least through the school districts that I represent. It's a common practice to see in policy. And again, it's limited to things such as the items listed.
So the only reason why I'm questioning what you're saying is that the policy says the board policy committee shall have the authority to make non-substantive changes. And then the board chair, the policy chair, will report to the board. The way I read that paragraph says to me the stuff comes to the policy committee. And then it's the policy committee's chair's responsibility to share that non-substantive changes were made at a board meeting.
I agree with that, with the one caveat that sometimes there's not documents going back and forth. So if somebody notices that there's a spelling error in a policy, administratively the change can be made. We'll use the current composition as an example. Tony would let Amy know, we fixed a spelling error in policy 200. And then at the next meeting, we would announce either in Tony's administrative remarks or in Amy's remarks that a non-substantive change was made.
Yeah, I'm going to push back and say that the way that this is written, the policy committee has that authority. So I would counter, unless we want to change the wording here, I would counter that even particularly that even minor changes should in some fashion be presented to the committee. Because that's where, the way I'm reading this, that's where the authority quote comes from, is that the committee can say, yep, go ahead and make those changes.
I happen to agree, and I think that just for accountability reasons, I think that's a good way of the workflow of bringing it to the committee, as you're saying, Susan, and then from there, the chair or.
And I don't know how anybody else feels about it, and I'm just reading it literally based on the language of that beginning paragraph, is that I don't think that it's an agenda item to be discussed necessarily. It's literally going to be on our policy committee agendas. I would think it's just for your information.
Correct.
And then, and this might, I mean, I know you guys are not, half of our committee is paperless, half of us are not. So to me, no big deal to look at a non-substantive change in paper.
Right.
I wouldn't want the waste of paper for me personally. So, you know, maybe Amy and Chuck would be comfortable also looking at it paperlessly, or maybe they get it and it's not a big deal.
I'm trying my best.
No, it's not, no, I'm just saying.
Getting there.
Since it's only half of us who need paper anyway, I'm mindful of that piece of this, but I definitely read that as the policy that the committee needs to be, is where the authority lies. And then it's the chair, it's Amy's responsibility to report on it.
Okay, so let me.
But not discussion, it's just, hey, we made these changes.
So let me ask you this question, and hearing what you're saying, because I'm not sure of one piece of that. If the committee has the authority, does that mean that that's exclusive? The administration couldn't do that without the committee?
Oh, I don't know what you guys think, but I would have thought that you guys find a bunch of spelling errors, a bunch of policy, and you just bring them to us as FYI information, and we go, oh, great, super. And that's where the authority comes from. It's acknowledgement, really, more than anything.
Okay.
One additional way I've seen this done, and it's up for it's up for the committee as to how much control you want to give out. But I have one or two school districts where the policy is written that administration can make these changes that are listed to the policy and notify the policy committee. Now, that's a more expansive, again, you're limiting it to non-substantive changes, so the items that are listed, I don't need to read them. Some will follow, and what was proposed here is a little bit more of a formal process where I agree with you, Susan, it's an action of the committee and then a notification to the board versus an action of administration and notification to the policy committee.
Well, I mean, I guess ultimately, we're going to hear from the board whether or not they're okay with this, with this policy. Because ultimately, because this is.
I'd go the other way. I would like to recommend that we actually give it back to the administrators. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's-
Yeah, I did
If you
too.
see a spelling mistake, I don't need you to bring that to the committee, and then we approve, you change it, and then you need to go back and alert the media that it was changed. I would prefer that, actually, that's what you guys do.
Administration has the authority to make non-substantive changes and must notify the policy committee or something like that. I like that better, too.
Do all that stuff?
Yeah.
So that way we'll know about it, but it's not our charge. We've got enough on our plate. You guys can do it.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that too. I was more speaking to, I don't think it can be one sole board member in the loop on this.
Right.
It would
no,
be
no.
actually better if
And
it's the
that would be a shall, not a
administration.
may.
Yeah, there's no board.
Shall notify the policy committee so that we make sure we know about it and,
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll work.
all right, so do you want to just run that sentence by us, Mr. Diazio, when you get a chance to make sure we're all settled on? And would that be a substantive change?
I would think so.
Yeah?
Yeah, that would be a substantive
Okay.
change, so we'll bring this back.
Okay, so
next
how's
month.
it going to read again? Something to the effect
No,
of?
we don't have to
No,
do
I was
that.
just going to say, this is only a first read.
Yeah, we
So
can make the
do we really
change
need to
here.
bring-
Right.
We can bring this up for first read, and actually, the other one.
Yeah, the other one too.
No, because the other one needs wordsmithing of the purpose.
Of the
reason
purpose,
you
right,
guys
and I want time
took
on
back
that
that
one
one.
to be able to do
Yes.
that. This one's kind of a simple one where
Okay.
we're just.
We're agreeing on it right now.
Right.
If you can get to a point where you agree on the language, it can move forward to first reading.
Correct.
This one, the 003?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So may I suggest, it'll read, "The administration shall have the authority to make non-substantive changes to board policies for the purpose of administrative clarity and shall bring any of those changes to the board policy committee."
Yeah, what you just said.
Yeah, I'm fine with
And in that last sentence where it says the policy committee chair or designee, that could be an administrator saying it too, right? Not, it wouldn't just be, I mean, I could do it or.
Or designee,
Yeah,
right.
an administrator would be a designee.
Correct.
Okay,
Ken, can you read that again? You just wrote.
no.
I can. The administration shall have the authority to make non-substantive changes to board policies for the purpose of administrative clarity and shall bring all of these changes to the board policy committee. And shall notify.
The policy committee of these changes.
I think notify implies that it doesn't require some kind of approval or vote or something. So I think notify might be.
And shall notify the policy committee of these
such
changes.
changes.
Oh, yes, perfect,
Okay,
of all
great.
such changes. Okay, super. So this is still going to go forward then for a first read. And before we go to new business and public comment, can we just have a recap of, just make sure we're all on the same page with what we've done here tonight, okay? If for no other person's clarity than my own. 006 is going forward for a second read
Can I have
in
that?
October? Is that correct?
Yes.
Second read?
That is going forward with the second read with the one change of including the information about Sunshine.
Sunshine, okay, great. And 004 is coming back for a first read, repeat first read in November because we're changing the purpose.
Correct. And moving that first section, the first line of that purpose that's currently there down to guidelines.
Okay,
Actually, one clarification.
Yes.
Technically, it won't be a repeat first read.
It'll be
because it's
first
never-
read.
First.
It's never
Correct.
gone for a first read.
okay. And 718 service animals is going for a first read in October.
Correct.
Okay, and 003 is going for a first read in
With the
October
minor addition.
with the,
No, with a change. with the
Change to an
The
addition.
capitalization.
Change done.
with the change.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you very much. And with that, is there any new business? Anybody? No? Okay. Oh, I did want to mention something. I lost it. It was in my head and now it's out. Let's go to public comment and maybe it'll come to me. Is there any final public comment?
While we're waiting for the public comment, there was a question earlier about the ethics law. And just to clarify, that's the Pennsylvania Ethics Act. And
Thanks.
what the superintendent is notifying the board of is their annual obligation to submit their statement of financial interest. That's an annual requirement of all elected board officials. So there was a question earlier, and I just want to clarify that.
I appreciate
Oh,
your
and you
addressing
know what?
that because that is not clear at all in the policy.
Okay,
I've
so
read it a
where-
number of different times, that last line, which is, the superintendent or designee shall inform board members and designated employees of their responsibility under the ethics law. So it doesn't explain what responsibility is being referenced there, as far as I can tell. Could someone explain to me how I would know what I just learned by reading that?
Right, so I do think that, for clarity's sake, what is it called again? Can you repeat that? Because I was thinking of the
You
answer.
know what, hang on. Could we let her finish her comments, and then we can bring this up in new business? That'd be because you said you wanted to go back to new business anyway. Or maybe we can't do it that way.
I would like to just, Ed had started to say this anyway,
right.
so before we lose our train of thought, Ed, please repeat for my sake what it is that you just told Mrs. Sherry.
So the ethics law that's cited is the Pennsylvania Ethics Act. So that was one of the questions, is what is that piece of legislation? So it's the Pennsylvania Ethics Act.
Okay.
And the other question is about the responsibility. What responsibility is being cited here that the superintendent needs to inform the board about?
And so the Ethics Act has a lot of requirements that board members are obligated to adhere to. But the one item that routinely comes up every year, it's an annual deliverable, is that board members have to fill out their statement of financial interests. And usually that comes from the board secretary.
Okay, so to sort of wrap around that, what I would request, and see if it's okay with the rest of the committee, is that could we just change, as long as we're doing 003, that last sentence to say, instead of under the ethics law, under the Pennsylvania Ethics Act, because I think that that is the correct title of that law, and for accuracy and clarity, could we just change that? That's non-substantive. Does anybody have any objection to that?
I do not.
Okay.
But how would someone know what responsibility is?
Well, if it's okay with you, let's just hear the rest of the questions, and then maybe we can circle back under new business to that, if that's all right. Just put a pin in that for,
I don't have any other questions.
that was,
It's
thank
very unclear to me because, as I said, it's not clear what the superintendent should be informing the board about here,
okay.
about their responsibility. Is it a broad responsibility? Is it they should review the entire ethics law? Or is it specific, which is that they should fill out their statements of financial interest? I don't know which is which
Okay.
from this discussion.
And I honestly think that that could be clarified, because their and responsibility is singular and there are multiple responsibilities. So if we say their responsibilities under the Pennsylvania Ethics Act, I'm satisfied that that means that you need to know what the Ethics Act is all about and the accompanying responsibilities. Could we just make that word plural? Does anybody have any objection to that?
I do.
Okay.
I do. I think we need to not do it this way.
Well, I understand that, but I think it was something that actually I think could be justifiably clarified.
Except we already closed the agenda on that. That's the problem. Amy, we can bring it back next month. We have a question.
First read, so.
It's first read.
Well, I'd like to just make, in case I forget, next month, can we just have it?
Because I have additional, Amy, because I have additional clarity that I would bring to that, but I wasn't going to open
Okay.
back up policy
Okay.
three.
Well, that's why I asked. Are you okay with that?
That's
You're
why I said
welcome-
no. Because
Okay.
I would open this up as conversation. I would make an additional clarity there, but I think it will, I would make additional clarity there.
Well,
I think
that's-
Mrs. Sherry's point is well taken, and I think we should clarify, but I don't think we should this isn't the process for doing that. That's
Well,
why I held it.
that's why when I asked you if you're, how do you feel about that, you are welcome to say, actually, I'd prefer that we discuss this at next month's policy committee meeting, and that would totally suffice for me.
Perfect, great.
And you?
I think I found the name of is it the Public Official and Employee Ethics Act, I believe that's it.
Okay.
I think it's the Public Official and Employee Ethics Act.
Okay, and I think Ed's got that covered. Do you have any questions, Chuck, before we go to our next public
No,
comment?
there are a lot of responsibilities in that act.
Okay. So is there any other public comment for this meeting, for this evening, this evening's meeting? No, seeing none. Is there any new business? Did I go out of order for that? I apologize if I did. Is there any new business? No?
I do have new business.
Okay.
My question to you is, my question to you is, do we now want to hold 3, or we'll just bring it back for another first read next month?
Yeah, it'll come back after first
Just,
read.
can you hit your mic?
It will come back
Okay.
to the policy committee after first read. If substantive changes are made at that point, it will go for a repeat first
Okay,
read.
great, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.